Okay, so we wait a little while now for people to arrive. Okay, I'm going to start it up now. This is Joe Firestone, and it's Saturday night. I'm here for Real Progressives, and I'm here once again with Stephen R. Jaffe, running in the California 12th District primary. His main opponent is Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House and the minority leader for the Democrats, as you know. And tonight we're going to complete a discussion of his agenda and get his impressions of the race. So, Steve, I'd like to welcome you again to the program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to return.
Oh, thank you very much. And would you like to talk about the things we have not covered yet? Hello, Steve?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to begin to talk about the things that we have not covered yet?
Well, surely that's a lot of topics. I can tell you the ones that occur to me first. I know that there's a great deal of discussion about immigration reform and DACA. I favor of the DACA program. I think to a certain degree my opponent sold out the DACA dreamers in a deal she made with 45, and who then, of course, reneged on that deal. And now the dreamers are left with nothing. Very disappointing to me. I think her and Senator Schumer kind of combined to bring that about. I am very much in favor of a discrete, defined pathway to citizenship for position. But there's been in discussions lately, an intersection of two important issues that have occurred in the context of the immigration discussion. And the other part of that would have to do with veterans' rights. I have some very strong support from veterans groups, in particular the National Veterans for Burmese group, such groups to endorse me nationally. And one of the things that has come up in the immigration discussion is that I don't know if how many people understand that one need not be a citizen of the U.S. to serve in the U.S. military, that immigrants serve in the U.S. military and do so. And what's happened is that there are immigrants who serve in the U.S. military who complete their tour of duty successfully and are honorably discharged, and they are still not given citizenship. In fact, it's so bad that there are those in that position who have finished their time in the military successfully, left the service, and then got deported. One of my colleagues here in California, who's running for the U.S. Senate in Feinstein's seat, his name is David Hildebrand. Last weekend, he went down to Tijuana, and he met with a group of these deported veterans.
Oh my God!
Who are down there trying to get back into the country whose military they served in. So what I'm going to do, and this is, I don't like to talk about doing a great deal before I get to Congress, but here's one thing I will do. I will introduce what I'm calling the Veteran Citizenship Act, and that will provide that for any immigrant who successfully serves in the U.S. military, documented or not, that upon success of a tour of duty in the military, that immigrant will be awarded immediate citizenship in the United States. Anyone who's willing to give up a couple of years of his or her life to serve in the military for a country a citizen in, has earned the citizenship, so far as I'm concerned. And anyone who has been inexplicably deported after serving in the military will be immediately let back into the country and given citizenship as well. So that's one issue that has come up. The other issues, I'm just looking on my list here, what might be most interesting. We discussed reforming the Democratic Party. There are two particular parts of that I'm interested in, aside from stopping them from cheating, which they do.
We talked about that actually somewhat, okay, but I'd be happy to talk some more about that because that's a very hot issue at this point.
Yeah, the two things that I would seek to do immediately is to, one, abolish superdelegates because they are undemocratic, and that's with a little d, and they really obliterate the primary votes of people around the U.S. and all the primaries who think that their votes are going to count. And that raises some interesting legal questions for me as well. The other thing that I would do, and this is, I don't know if it's around the country, but it certainly is present in California, is that our state party has a completely ridiculous rule that says if an incumbent chooses to run again for the same office, then the incumbent is given an automatic endorsement of the state party, regardless of how they have performed in the office. So what happened this last time around is there are several state assemblymen here in California who have been accused of some rather bad acts of sexual harassment and sexual abuse of their employees or other people, but they were unchallenged in the primary. So they got automatically endorsed, notwithstanding the accusations that were hanging over their head. And I think one or more of them actually resigned over that. So I would seek to abolish this automatic endorsement process as part of our state party as well.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Something that's very personal to me and I feel very strongly about is doing what's called decriminalizing mental illness in the United States.
And I feel very strongly about that myself.
Yeah. I have a close family member who suffers from a severe mental illness, and I've been up to my eyeballs in the advocacy for people in that condition and their families for 20 years now. Oh, so I have some very strong opinions and ideas about what to do about that, which I can elaborate on if you'd like. But that's one issue that's important. I think we talked a little bit about the addiction to the war, the addiction to a war economy, and the culture of war itself.
Yes,
that's
we
very
did.
important to me. That is important to me as well.
Okay, so can we assume that you would vote to reform the Patriot Act and also to revoke the AUMF?
Yeah, you cut out there for 1 second. I'm sorry. I heard, can you assume?
Can I assume that you would vote to revoke the AUMF, okay, and to revise the Patriot Act so it no longer contains any violations of our civil liberties?
There are a few remnants of the Patriot Act that I like, such as interagency cooperation, but there's most of it which is invasive and violates, as far as I'm concerned, the Fourth Amendment.
Yes,
NSA spying, yes, and I certainly would revoke those. My opponent recently voted to continue the warrantless NSA spying,
yes,
which I would not have done. I would not have done that, and if I'm called upon to do that as a congressman, I will vote against it.
Okay, and if you're called upon to vote on the AUMF, the authorization for the use of force, would you vote against that also, or actually vote for the revocation?
I think carves out the to extract existing forces. Do I have the right one?
I don't know. Your sound's a little wavy, so if you could say it again, it'd be good.
I said I believe that is the one that carves out an exception for users to extract existing forces or else. I think that's what.
That is the one that gives the authority to the executive branch to use military force where it likes in foreign lands. In other words, that was the whole basis for the intervention in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all the wars that we've engaged in since. Both the public interventions and the secret interventions.
Yes, I think this all goes back to Vietnam, the Tonkin Resolution, and when the executive began to take over the war powers. I'd like to see Congress more involved. Obviously, that's what the Constitution anticipates. The power to declare war does reside with the Congress, but that power has not been aggressively sought or exercised.
But it's actually more than that. It's that that Congress, through passing bills like the AUMF, have actually transferred the power over to the president.
Well, I'm not sure that's constitutional, but I don't know if Congress
constitutional. I think there are certain powers Congress has, which constitutionally they should not be able to transfer to anybody else.
Yes, that's what is known to lawyers as non-delegable powers.
Exactly.
You cannot delegate. Yes, you cannot. That's a non-delegable power, and I think obviously there are circumstances where you need to act quickly in a short number of hours, but for anything that's going to be sustained or putting troops on the ground in like Iraq, I think that should have to be approved by the Congress.
I think I would go so far as to say perhaps not even simply approved by Congress, but that there ought to be a declaration of war on something like that.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying. The power to declare war, I think that's what I'm saying.
Okay, so in general, you're for restraining the U.S. military adventures in foreign lands.
Yes, and that I would think would shrink the $700 billion military budget, which the Congress just passed again. Unbelievable. It's
well, and
bloated
not only
yeah, it's bloated and it's obscene. We make more weapons than we can use. We have to give them away to police departments and try to sell them to foreign governments because we can't use all the arms that we have built, that we are building.
right, but you're not for giving them away to police departments, are you?
No, that's where they're getting it. They're getting
Yeah, I know that's where they're getting
military
it.
equipment. No police department, as far as I know, needs an armored personnel carrier.
I completely agree, of course. But the question is, should the Congress revoke those arms and demilitarize the police?
Cut the they should revoke the authorization for the overspending of funds to build that many weapons. I think we're saying the same thing two different ways.
Well, you know what I'm actually saying, and this is the first time I've thought of it, so I don't know how practical it is. But it seems to me it would be a good thing if the federal government were to call for the return, okay, of those arms and the destruction, okay, of those arms, so that in our local areas we get back to policing rather than fighting wars against the civilian population.
Well, that's an interesting concept. I don't know that you're going to get a lot of local police support for destruction of existing equipment that they have. I think where you start is stop giving it to them or selling it to them.
I'm sure that's true.
And the stuff will obviously over time it will diminish by attrition. But I'm not opposed to taking some back if it's not being used or doesn't need to be there, particularly if it's much more military than it is law enforcement.
Okay, we briefly talked on the last occasion about your wage plan, okay, the minimum wage plan, and you were in favor of $15 an hour, but you wanted the $15 an hour to be adjusted to the cost of living in the location where the minimum wage was actually paid.
That's correct.
So that I think that assumes that the minimum wage in San Francisco, if it were CPI adjusted, would be much higher than $15. In your particular
that is
district,
correct.
I suspect it might be $22 to $24 an hour.
It may very well be, but the concept behind what I'm proposing is that the buying power of that indexed minimum wage would be approximately equal wherever it's paid in the U.S. The buying power.
Yes, I agree. That is the concept, okay, in back of that. And I entirely agree with that concept. Okay, there will be people who disagree with it on grounds that on the face of it, it's not an equal payment, okay, across the areas, okay, and also that there might be a policy interest, okay, in getting people to relocate from the urban areas in order to disperse the population more broadly, and that if the wage were the same, okay, in all areas, then that might serve as an incentive for more people to move into the rural areas, which are underpopulated compared to San Francisco, okay, or New York, or the major centers in this country. So I guess that's the counter argument. Okay, I don't actually myself agree with the counter argument, but
I'm not so sure that would work, because the people who would be enticed to move to the more rural areas would be the minimum wage workers, and who would that leave in the cities? That would just leave the wealthy, and that would turn our cities into kind of walled fortresses of gentrification. Wealthy would live.
Yes,
so I think
you do that, and I think the other argument against it, Kay, is first of all, it's not so good to get people to move to other areas when they would like to stay where they are, okay, where their families are, okay. And the other problem, of course, is that if they go to the rural areas, even if they have a minimum wage of $15 an hour in the rural areas, they still have to find jobs in the rural areas.
That is correct.
So that, of course, is a problem.
It's complex. It's complex. But I think that the notion of leveling the minimum wage with CPI adjustments is a place to start. Then you can take the longer how to use that to socially engineer or geographically engineer changes in the population location that may long-term benefit the country.
Okay, I see on your plank you want to tax the millionaires.
I do.
Okay, and you want to tax the millionaires in order to reduce income inequality and disparity.
That is correct. I'm not the youngest guy on the block here, so I grew up in the 50s and early 60s during so far as I know, the most prosperous time, post-World War II era. And during that time, for those of us who were around or have studied it, one income could comfortably support a family. The middle class was not only not shrinking, it was growing. And during this period of time of tremendous prosperity, there was in place a graduated tax rate. The more you earned, the more you paid. And at the highest levels, the highest tax rate was 92%.
I recall.
92%.
Yes, I recall.
And when you understand that that was in place during the most prosperous time the country's ever known, I think the argument that would tax our way of life out of existence just evaporates. I think a lot of people don't understand how a graduated tax scheme works. The first tier of taxes is relatively lower, is lower than it is now. Then as you keep earning more money and advancing up the tier of income, the tax rate goes up. So that if you're earning, and I'll just make up numbers, if you're earning over $1 million a year, maybe you should be taxed at 92% for between 1 million and 5 million. If you're up at $1 million, no one's going to be taking out the violins for you at that point. So I advocate that kind of graduated tax proposal. I think it is fair, and I think it is something that will help resurrect our middle class, which is being gutted and can only be a horribly bad thing to do to the country over the long term.
Okay, I can't help but notice that in the context of that answer, you did not say that you want to tax the millionaires in order to get the money we need to pay for the other reforms that you would like to see.
Well, I think that's implicit in my answer. Those additional taxes will go to that. I also would like to see a cap on the compensation of corporate CEOs. Nobody needs to earn $30 or $40 million a year. One of the ideas you frequently hear tossed around is that the CEO's maximum salary should be some factor, whether it's 30 times or 25 times the compensation of the lowest paid worker in that company. Because right now, the disparity between the lowest paid worker and the CEOs of some company is several hundred times what they earn. And there's I don't think there's any justification for that. Companies not doing well or going bankrupt are paying their CEOs just obscene salaries and bailing them out with golden parachutes. So I would be for some kind of a CEO compensation.
Okay, so I think we generally agree on taxing principles, okay, except for the idea that taxes pay for anything. The way the system works right now, okay, in terms of the internals of the financing system, the tax revenues that are collected from the private sector are actually destroyed by the Federal Reserve prior to the tax money getting into the Treasury spending account. So since that's the case, from a strict sort of technical point of view, the taxes do not fund anything. It's really the power of the Federal Reserve, which was delegated by the Congress to the Federal Reserve, that actually funds things.
But taxes do not only exist to pay for things. Taxes. Somebody famous once said, and I don't remember who said it, the power to tax is the power to destroy.
John Marshall said it. But John Marshall, the first justice of the Supreme Court, said that.
Right. Taxes can be used to social policy, and our discussion about CEOs and the wealth disparity, I think, is one legitimate use of taxes to send the message out that we are not an oligarchy and we are not going to turn ourselves into one, that we want economic equity to be present in the U.S. And taxes are one way to send that message.
I think we generally agree that there are all kinds of purposes for taxation. Okay, and we also look at the need for taxation to drain money out of the private sector. In other words, there is an inflation control function for taxes, which is extremely important. Taxes also are extremely important in order to maintain the value of the currency. Okay? In other words, one big reason why people need to have the currency of the United States and cannot simply switch over, let's say, to Bitcoin, okay, or something like that, is because they need federal currency to pay their taxes. Okay, or their banks need to have the proper reserves in order to pay taxes on behalf of the people who send the Treasury Department their checks to pay for taxes. Okay, so there is that function of draining money out of the economy, which is extremely important for those two reasons, as well as the other reasons that you mentioned. So those functions are very important, and everything you've said about good reasons for taxing is true. But saying that the taxes are for funding is not strictly true, because strictly they do not fund. And in our last discussion, okay, it was on that basis that I asked you to look at overt but congressional financing as a method for funding. And the advantage, okay, of such a method would be to decouple, to end the pay-go system, which is constantly used by the rightists to stop economic legislation which progressives would like to see. It's always about, are we increasing the debt? Okay, it's always about, we have to be neutral with respect to the deficit here, because if we're not deficit neutral, we're going to run up the debt. And we can't afford that because we can't afford to pay the debt, which of course is a big myth, but it's a huge political problem, which surfaces, resurfaces, goes away for a little while, comes back again. Now, right now, it's kind of at an ebb as an issue, simply because the Republicans have abandoned fiscal conservatism, except when it comes to things which the Democrats like. So, of course, it's easy to point out the hypocrisy right now, and it's easy for the Democrats to run some deficits themselves right now, if they want to, just by pointing the finger at the Republicans who previously did it. Okay, but as long as the debt is there, as long as it remains, the debt, but terrorism industry will be trumpeting how damaging the debt is and how it's going to ruin the lives of our grandchildren, and our children, and how we have to get rid of the debt by running surpluses, or at least by reducing the debt to GDP ratio. And then that, of course, leads to austerity budgeting. So the reason why I brought up OCF to you last time was to give you a way out of that, and to answer the how are you going to pay for it question, which the conservatives are going to level at you at some point. But even before that, you're certain to get it from Nancy Pelosi. She is certain to direct that at you, and certain to talk about the pay-go system and her role in establishing the system and continuing to apply it over time. And she will say that the pay-go system is the heart of being fiscally responsible, whereas the real heart of being fiscally responsible is to spend for the public purpose. It's about Congress spending on the right things that are going to benefit people and that are going to be good for the country. It's not about reaching some imaginary debt to GDP ratio. Well, I guess it's not imaginary, but it's abstract. And by itself, it doesn't mean anything to people. All it does is to construct a political issue which is not in itself of financial significance, but is very important in the rough and tumble, of politics in D.C. So the question I'm asking is, will you avoid reinforcing the taxes fund spending theme and work to include the OCF language in all appropriations bills and CR bills as your answer to the how you're going to pay for it question?
The first to me is that it is a myth that running a government is anywhere comparable or should be compared to running a business. Right, or to running a household. A household or a business. Both a business and a household have constrictions on the amount they can spend, and that constriction is clearly governed by how much they have to spend or take in. You can't spend, If you're a household or a business, you cannot spend money that does not exist. You can borrow eventually. That house of cards, unless there's a way to pay it back, is going to come down. So that's the first observation that I would make. That the old congressional, what is the overt congressional funding? Is that what it is? Yes.
It's overt congressional financing.
Financing. I knew the F there. Yeah.
Right.
It's an intriguing idea to me. I have to process it a little more, but it's certainly not something that I'm going to discard or reject out of hand. I think that historically, it's been implied in the legislation. Anytime there is legislation that Congress mandates the money be spent, and that results in deficit spending, that really is kind of an implicit overt congressional financing, is it not?
It's kind of implicit, but of course the Treasury Department has to, to do the deficit spending. It also often has to navigate its way over the barrier of the debt limit. In other words, the administration has to do that.
Yes.
And then you have the fights in Congress, and you have the government shutdowns involved in trying to make a deal to raise the debt limit, which always results in the progressive side losing something in the discretionary spending area. That's been going on for years now.
Do you believe there should be a debt limit at all?
No, I do not believe there should be a debt limit at all. Okay, and one easy way past the debt ceiling is that if you get a majority in Congress for it, the debt ceiling law could simply be repealed. But the reason why I don't believe that is because Congress has control of the purse strings through the appropriations Congress makes. So if Congress appropriates deficit spending and mandates the Treasury to do the deficit spending, it doesn't make any sense to put further barriers in front of the Treasury so that it cannot do its constitutional duty to spend what Congress has said, has ordered it to spend. That makes no sense to me.
Right, but I think what I hear you.
So I don't think we should have a debt ceiling. Okay, but apart from that, if we took the debt ceiling away, it would still leave the debt issue on the table in terms of as a political issue. It would still leave the arguments over the size of the debt and the threat to our grandchildren, when there's no threat from it at all. But we'd be involved in these constant arguments concerning the size of the debt limit anytime the Republicans thought it was to their advantage to practice fiscal conservatism and to talk about being, the adults in the room, and saying again that they're the fiscally responsible ones. But Paul Ryan is the fiscally responsible one every time he wants to cut Social Security, or other entitlements. But he's extremely silent about how fiscally responsible he is when he wants to approve a tax cut of $1.5 trillion for wealthy people. Okay, so we know how that goes, and we know how the hypocrisy goes, but that doesn't change the fact that these fights are damaging and that it would be best for all if the political issue was off the table.
Well, what I think I hear you saying is that the debt limit, the concept of a debt limit in connection with running the government is itself a wholly artificial number, an arbitrary artificial number that's put there because somewhere in the collective public psyche, there's this notion that you can't spend more than you take in.
It's partly due to
running
that.
Up here.
Yes, it's partly due to that. It's also due to the fact that historically, the debt limit law was passed, but primarily by progressives to restrain spending in the First World War.
Okay. But I mean, in fact, I think we talked about a household. It's as if the debt limit is like your credit card limit, which you keep raising as you need to buy more goods and services. And
which you keep raising in order to pay bills that you have already incurred. In other words, it's analogous to a situation where you had to raise your credit limit, but somehow you were able to incur the bills first without increasing the credit card limit, which, of course, the credit card companies, would never allow you to do.
Of course they do, yes. I know. They want you in debt. Credit card limits, if people max them out, and they tell you right on the statement, if you pay only the minimum, it will take you 40-something years to retire this debt because of the ridiculous interest rates, the 20 interest rate they're charging you. So.
Yes, absolutely ridiculous in relation to the rates they pay for credit that they get from the Federal Reserve, which are still fairly close to zero right now. And the credit card companies turn around and charge us. Well, it depends on if we're a business or not, or personal, or whatever. Okay, but anywhere from 7K or 8% now, up to 29% if you're in real bad shape on your credit cards. Yes, it's outrageous,
I believe so.
And has to be stopped. Of course, it's putting the whole country in debt. As long as we're talking about that, I don't see anything on your program dealing with student loans. And
that's a thorny problem. I am absolutely in favor of some kind of student debt relief. There's a couple of specifics I can comment on. One is what we just finished talking about, is the rate of student debt interest is much too high, and student debt interest rate should be lowered to make it, at least for the short term, not so damaging and to the students, and so they could pay it off quicker. There is a provision in the Student Debt Act that prevents students from discharging their student loans in bankruptcy. I don't think it should be wholesale obliterated, but I think there are circumstances under which discharge bankruptcy might be fair and needs. The problem of, and a lot of people say, why not just forgive them all?
Yes, that's what I say.
Yeah, well, that's theory going forward, but what are you going to tell the people who just spent 15, 20, 30 years or whatever student debts about why, what I have thought about proposing is some kind of, remember I mentioned I think, and this kind of dovetails to the guaranteed job matter that we talked about. I think if a student has some student and wants to work country and can't get a job otherwise, they should be able to go to work in some kind of a government program, such as the WPA, doing the kinds of things that need to be done. And we already talked about what those kinds of things are. whether it's infrastructure repair or the other kinds of services you talked about. And I think for every dollar that they earn in that job, they should be forgiven a multiple of their student debt loan, dollars maybe, of their student debt loan. So
well, that's an interesting idea.
There's a double benefit to that. One, we get people to go to work and we have employment and they are doing things that need to be done. And secondly, we are reducing their student debt at the same time. And so I it's an idea that I'm becoming more fond of as I talk about it more.
Okay, I think it's an interesting idea. However, I also think that if you look at the student debt situation, there are people out there that have been paying on their student loans for 20, 30 years. They have paid and paid and paid and more than paid any reasonable debt all through a period of time where the banks have basically been running things in Washington and have been sucking them dry. Also now, 80% of the student debt, okay, is owned by the federal government.
Yes, Department of Education.
Right, okay, by the Department of Education. And the federal government, of course, the way in which the federal government is different from a household, okay, and from an organization, is that the federal government creates its own money. The Treasury Department creates the coins, and the Federal Reserve issues the dollars after the Treasury Department actually prints them. Okay, and then finally, the Federal Reserve creates the reserves, the additions to account balances under conditions specified by the Congress for it to actually do so. So there's no private money involved, okay, in any of this directly, okay, and therefore it would not hurt the federal government at all to completely forgive the debts, the 80% of the debts that they own, the government owns. Okay, but the other point about this also is, yes, the people who have paid off their loans over a long period of time are going to feel aggrieved by this. Okay, and I know that, but
justifiably so.
Right, but it would be far better to take the burden off the people who have the loans now, start there, and then have a program for compensating people who earlier paid too much because of the nature of the system. In other words, there might be compensation for them, okay, in order to take some of the feelings of the grievances away. Okay, but also there was a study recently done by the Levy Institute, okay, and the Sanders Institute, by collaborating again. Okay, the senior author was Scott Fulwiler, and the second author is Stephanie Kelton.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and then there were some other authors, okay, and they did a study using modeling, okay, and also data, okay, and they found that if student loan debt was completely forgiven, okay, and eliminated, it would improve the economic situation. It would increase GDP and would be actually of benefit to everyone from a macroeconomic standpoint. So there's a macroeconomic reason why you would want to forgive the debt. rather than have it continuing to cost the economy money.
All right. Well, this dovetails right into another related issue in my plank, having to do with education, which is I believe that state schools, public education, institutions of public education, such as state universities and colleges and community colleges, should be free to the people who go there. A lot of other countries do that. They benefit from that. And if that kind of thinking were to become more common and come into existence, there a lot of the student loan that we're talking about would never come into existence at all.
Right.
And that might be the long-term solution to this issue. There's a reason that kindergarten through high school.
It's a long-term solution to this issue, okay, but it's also something that would be of substantial benefit right now to people who are starting out in colleges.
Oh, yes.
In other words, to know they could go for free, and to go for free would be really great for them and great for equality, okay, of opportunity, which has taken a big hit in our country over a period of time.
Yes, and there's a reason kindergarten through high school is free, and that is because of the very strong public policy that we have, that it is in the national interest that people be educated. Education is something that benefits everybody, notwithstanding what our current president thinks. One of my favorite quotes of his is, he said during the campaign, "I love the poorly educated." And the reason he said that, he thought he was joking, but he was not, because poorly educated are more easily manipulated and controlled than are people who are critical thinkers and educated. But leaving that aside, the same public policy that exists for free K through high school should extend to K through bachelor's degree. The reasoning is exactly the same.
Yes, I think so, except I would go even further than that and say K through professional school, okay, and graduate school. In other words, there should be public universities that cover those years also, that people can go to, so you don't have to be fairly well off but to get a law degree, or to get some sort of a professional degree, or to go to graduate school and get a PhD. In other words, those things ought to be open to all Americans.
Yes, no, I agree, and that will tremendously increase the competition in those schools, but maybe that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, maybe that's not a bad thing at all. Okay, so there's another delicate issue which I need to bring up with you, okay, and that is that you've been approached by Victor Tiffany to sign a CFAR contract, a contract for American renewal. We here are very closely associated with CFAR and Victor, because they constitute the major effort that we have, okay, at activism, but going on now. In other words, we would like people to commit to the items in this contract, so that the people who want to vote for them can have a greater degree of trust in what they will do when they get to Congress. Now, early in the program, I noticed you mentioned that you don't like to say what you will do after you actually get into Congress. And I think I understand the reasons for that, but I think it's still worth discussing and talking through the issue.
Okay, well, I'll be glad to respond to that.
Okay, thanks.
Please, please keep in mind that I started law school in 1967, which is 51 years ago, and I went through 3 years, and I've been practicing law since. Passed the bar and been practicing law since. So I'm the victim of a certain kind of thinking, and I'm a trial lawyer to boot, which means that I actually go to trial and do battle in the courtroom. So I have acquired a policy to tell my sons, my friends, and my clients, it is all ever yourself when you don't have to. And the reason for that is, well, let me finish. The reason for that is because life is uncertain, because you never know what is going to be thrown at you or the context in which you may be asked a question or have to act. And it kind of comes down to relying on your experience and judgment at any given time to do the right thing. My issue with the CFAR contract, and there's only two. One is the notion that I think there was a resignation. Is that the one that's got the resignation in it?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not comfortable with that, because that's a fertile ground for immediate. I mean, I could be in office 2 days and somebody out there in the universe could say, well, this guy Jaffe has breached the CFAR agreement, so let's go get him and make him resign. And that's not something that I really want to engage in right away. And I'm not sure constitutionally that a congressman, a person elected to the Congress, whether it's Senate or House, can contract to resign. I'm not sure that's okay. The other more practical issue I have is, if suppose I got in there and I did breach it, I changed my mind on something, which I want to reserve the right to do. What is the remedy? What is the remedy that, who's the contract with? Who is the party on the other side of this contract? And if I breach, what is their remedy? They going to sue me for breach of contract? What are their damages? How are their damages measured? Can you compel me to resign? It raises all kinds of troublesome legal questions in my mind. And it has nothing to do with my present position on any of the issues that are set forth in there. Because as I recall, I think I agreed with either all or most of them. That's not the issue. The issue is the more legal ones that I've just brought up now.
Okay, and I completely understand that. Okay, because I'm someone who very often deals in contracts. Okay, or in the past, I have, and I'm very aware of the problems involved in first of all, signing an unconscionable contract, and also the problems that are there in knowingly signing a contract that is an unenforceable contract.
Yeah, and there's another issue.
Say one is not supposed to do that. Okay.
And what's the consideration? I know what the other side's getting. It's getting a promise for me to resign. What am I getting from them by doing this? What is the consideration?
Well, what you're getting from them is an endorsement.
Okay.
It's not a sure endorsement. Okay. In other words, if someone else in your district was to also sign the CFAR contract, okay, then they would be also supported by CFAR. Right. Okay, but in your particular race, you'd be the only one who would be signing CFAR, and so you would then have an endorsement, but from the group uh, that is signing the contract with you. Okay, but that group, okay, ourselves in a sense, okay, because it's our activism group, uh, thinks of the contract as a contract between you and the voters. In other words, you asserting that you will do something when you get into Congress, okay, and but promising that to the voters in return for their support. And there's an element in CFAR also where voters can go to the website and on their end sign a contract saying that they will support CFAR candidates. Okay. So there is something of a commitment from the voters on the other side. Okay, but these are in a sense the legalities, okay, of what is going on here. What obviously is going on as a reality is that in the recent past, we have an epidemic, okay, of politicians promising things or saying things or claiming to be for particular positions and then getting into office and doing something completely different.
Well, that's what elections are for, and that's why the House of Representatives has to run for re-election every 2 years, which means they're always running for re-election.
Right. But what the contract is for, in a sense, is to get people to state in a relatively specific way what they favor at the time of going into the contract so the voters can clearly evaluate whether they have voted in a different way afterwards. We live in a time where essentially politicians are debating what the meaning of is, as you well know. Okay, and with that kind of sophistry going on, the general reaction, okay, of voters is, we can't trust anything that our politicians are saying to us.
Well, I have no issues going on the record about where I stand on any particular bill or issue. I have no problem with that whatsoever, and I have no problem being held accountable for what I have said compared to what I do. I don't have any issues with that.
Okay, so if you look at CFAR as an exercise, okay, in doing that, then why would it be a problem for you?
Because of the legal issues that I raised. I have problems with that. I don't want to contract away my office. I don't think I can. And I don't want some less than rational would-be constituent filing a lawsuit in some federal district court and serving me with a summons saying I'm suing you for breach of the CFAR contract because I like to think I'll have more important things to do than defend frivolous lawsuits.
Okay, so in Victor's case, he's already received advice from lawyers who think in the manner that you think, okay, and who assure him that the CFAR contract is only metaphorically a contract in a political sense.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'd like to hear from those lawyers and have them sign an indemnity agreement so that if anything bad happens to me, they can indemnify me. I mean, if they're that confident in their opinion.
Okay. What I'm wondering is there room for further discussion between yourself and Victor Tiffany in the sense of a further conversation on this?
Oh, sure. I never will close the door on good faith talk. Never. The answer is yes.
Okay, so if he invites you onto his show, then okay, or if he invites you just for a conference, then you'd certainly be willing to accept his invitation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would.
Okay, so let's move on to some of your other thinking. If you're willing to stay, it's now 9:05, and
Well,
I
I could do
promise.
another 15 or 20 minutes is fine. That's fine.
Okay, great. Uh, okay, so we talked a little bit about ending homelessness last time.
Hmm.
Uh, okay, but I wasn't sure of your ideas on that. What I see on your website was that if we had a Medicare for All plan actually passed, that would be a really good way of addressing homelessness because of the intersectionality of the two issues.
Yes, it is not a magic wand. Healthcare is only one component of the causes of homelessness. There are economic and social causes as well as health causes. My thoughts on homelessness, I guess I have two things that have been running through my mind recently. One is that I'm going to speak about San Francisco because it's the city I know obviously best. This may or may not be true of other cities with the same problem. It is my opinion, and this is somewhat blasphemous here in the very politically correct city of San Francisco, that with a budget of somewhere between 250 and 300 billion dollars, I'm sorry, $1 million. It's 250 to 300 million dollars that is allocated completely to the homelessness program here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
We have a homelessness czar who
Yeah.
gets $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
There's a great deal of money being thrown at what people call the homelessness problem, and nothing happens. There is no solution. There's no visible progress. So what has occurred to me is that homelessness has become so institutionalized into San Francisco's culture, institutionalized into its economic systems, where so many people make their living trying to solve homelessness, that the city and the population have come to have a stake in the continuation of the problem.
Mm.
And that's blasphemous, because anybody in City Hall would say, oh my God, of course not, we want it all gone. But I don't think they do. Because with $250 million every year being dished out, you could put every single homeless person into shelter, treat them medically, and take care of them with the same dollars. So it's not about money. It's about the homeless advocates fighting. There's people called homeless advocates who fight very hard for what they call homeless rights. And this touches very much on the mental health issue that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I have a very strong opinion that does a person have the right to refuse medication, a mentally ill person? Yes, they do have that right. But to exercise a right, one must be competent to do it. And a person who is severely or floridly mentally ill is not competent to exercise or invoke a right. The same way a minor can't sign a contract or a person suffering from Alzheimer's can't sign a contract. They're not competent to contract.
Yes.
A very seriously mentally ill person is not competent to make an intelligent choice to refuse medication. So you've got this dichotomy between homeless advocates who don't want them to be medicated and other people. There's a guy with my last name who's absolutely no relation to me called DJ Jaffe who wrote a new book. I didn't even know he existed till about a year ago. He wrote a new book called Insane Consequences, where he says we have to stop thinking about being mental health advocates and start being advocates for the seriously mentally ill.
Yes,
and stop sugarcoating everything. So I think the problems, if you go ask a homeless person here in San Francisco, why don't you go to the shelter? And, here's the shelter. You will hear, look, I live in a community. It may not be your kind of community, but we've got a dozen tents in this little encampment, and I don't want to leave my friends.
Yep.
And when I go into the shelter, they treat me badly. They demean me. And by the way, I have a pet dog, which they won't let in, and I'm not going to leave my home, which is my tent and my community and my friends, to go somewhere where I'm going to be treated badly, separated from my pet, who I may never see again.
Right.
It evolves. Okay, it's a very complicated problem.
Okay.
And, we have to find. It's a long-winded way of saying we have to find where this is so institutionalized and deep-rooted, and get rid of that, and then start working on the solutions.
Okay, but to back up a little bit on this,
yes,
you've already said that it would greatly help this problem if we had a single-payer healthcare system.
100% of the homeless people out there are never going to pay a medical bill. They are going to wait until they're so sick that they're taken to general and they're on Medicaid or whatever the federal or state or local system is. They're never going to pay. They're never going to pay in medical bills, and nobody is homeless is thinking, "Gee, should I go to the hospital so I don't have to pay a bill?" They are judgment proof. They will never have to worry about being sued. So it's not.
But you've also said that right. But you've also said that one way in which a single payer would help the situation, okay, is by preventing people from becoming homeless in the first place.
Yes, that's true. But that, like everything else, is very complicated. The main causes of homelessness in San Francisco, or one of the main causes, is evictions. It's the gentrification. People are being evicted from their homes and they literally have nowhere to go. People aren't coming to San Francisco, hey, let's go to San Francisco and be homeless. These are people, a large percentage of the people we are finding out who are on the streets of San Francisco are people who formerly had housing and lost it. They were evicted.
And they lost it due to eviction and not due to non-payment of.
That's right. That's right. They are living bills. They're living in rent-controlled or SROs where they can afford to stay there. But the landlord decides, I don't like this business I'm in anymore. I need to get these people out, tear it down, put up luxury condominiums, and then rake in the money. And that is. Now I'm talking about the heart of the controversy here in the city. It's called the Ellis Act and the Costa-Hawkins Act. One's rent control, and one gives the landlord the right to actually evict a rent-controlled tenant if the landlord wants to move his own family in or wants to go out of the landlord business. And those are abused laws, and that's how they're getting thrown out.
Okay, well, that's really very interesting, I think.
Yes.
But to go further with the intersectionality, okay, of this, it seems to me there's another area where a federal job guarantee would really help things, because if that existed, and given your cost of living adjustment plan, okay, which would be applied in that program as well, then people who are living in apartment housing would have a greater amount of income, and there might be fewer of them thrown out of their homes as a result. They'd be able to withstand some of the increases. True?
I don't know. I to be honest with you, and this is nothing more than my eyeball assessment, but I've spent hours and hours and hours on the streets of San Francisco the last couple of years. I'm not sure a lot of the homeless people that I see are truly employable. I think the people who lose their jobs in their homes because of lack of income are the ones who move somewhere else. They move to the East Bay, or they move to different parts of California, or they just move away. The ones who wind up in the street are the ones who are on public assistance and lose their place to live because of these evictions, these abusive evictions, and they are the ones who wind up on the street. They're already on public assistance, and very, very few of them are already working.
So that relates to your issue of protect cities from gentrification.
Yes, it does. It's the motive behind all these evictions is gentrification. They're sitting on a lot that's got a rent-controlled building in it because it was built before '79. So the landlord says to himself, "Boy, if I didn't have to put up with these rent controllers, I could make $5 million in the space of a year or two by tearing down the building, throwing up 24 condominium units, and selling them for between $1 and $2 million each, which is what they cost."
So you say we must take federal action to protect and expand the affordable family housing.
Absolutely. And there's different ways to do that. Homelessness and housing are, to be candid with you, highly local issues. They're not issues on the first tier of federal kinds of legislation. They're unique to the locality where they are. Obviously, for homelessness, these people are on the ground in the city, and housing is also highly local in nature and highly local government controlled. Zoning, for example, the feds don't do zoning.
Yes, I know.
There's a bill pending now in the state legislature. You're going to hear another short speech here by a guy who was elected to the state Senate. He wants to increase the density of development along transportation corridors throughout the state and take over from the cities their power to control what kinds of buildings and zoning they have along these high density corridors. Well, we've got so much public transportation in San Francisco. He's talking about 90% of the city of San Francisco along public transportation corridors. And this guy is in the pocket of real estate developers. And this is back to the gentrification issue. All these issues intersect, as you're now seeing. Homelessness, housing, and gentrification
I agree, they do intersect.
Are all different parts of the same pie, if you would. Different slices in the same pie. And that is easily the most controversial bill pending in the state legislature right now. I think it's 587 or 857. I may have the numbers inverted. And the name I don't mind saying the guy's name, Senator Scott Wiener is the name of the guy. I'll leave that where it is.
Okay. Okay, so that
I mean, you could do a whole show on that one bill.
I'm sure I could do a whole show on that one bill.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess where we are now is at another sensitive kind of question. You might get into Congress and run into a difficult kind of context where you would be able to pass a single payer bill, where you could get a sufficient number of single payer votes to pass a single payer bill, but only if you did not vote to increase taxes. Okay. In other words, you might have a situation where people would vote for single payer, but would not attach any taxes to that bill.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation, would you still vote for single payer?
Well, that's kind of a trick question. Let me tell you what I think. Let's take a hypothetical business, the XYZ Widget Company. So XYZ Widget Company has 100 employees, and it's paying, I'll say, $20,000 to $30,000 a month right now under our present healthcare system in health insurance premiums to cover its employees.
Yes.
From the CEO down to the bottom guy, okay? 20 to 30 grand. I pass single payer and I say, look, Mr. CEO, Mr. XYZ, or whatever your name is, with single payer, your health insurance premium is going away. You will have no health insurance premium. But to pay for single payer, we're going to impose an employment tax on you that's $10,000 a month. Okay? Not an income tax, an employment tax. Call it whatever you want. Medical tax of some kind, medical healthcare tax. Similar to what I pay to Medicare right now to help run its program. So here we got the company now. It's gotten rid of 20 to 30 grand in health insurance premiums. It's taken on $10,000 of medical payments to the program. It's ahead $10,000 to $20,000. Is that a new tax? To my mind, no. I've made a net benefit to this company of savings of $10,000 to $20,000 a year. That's not a tax.
Okay, I certainly agree that you've made that particular gain for the company. However, since you know that taxes do not fund spending, then why would you impose such a tax on the company while telling them that it was in order to pay for the single payer bill?
Well, if you're right on the taxes do not fund spending issue,
I'm right about that.
Yeah, well, if that's correct, then maybe I don't need to. Maybe I can vote for it and promise not to raise taxes. If you're right, because it'll have no consequence to whether the program's going to go in and work.
Okay, to make it work, you would most probably have either to get rid of the debt ceiling or alternatively to pass the OCF method, okay, of financing, which would get you into the following procedures, which I think are really a good idea in any case. Okay, the procedures would be that Congress first take up its spending bills. In other words, what it wants to spend for the public purpose because it's going to be beneficial, okay, to the communities in the country. Okay, and you pass, or Congress passes those bills. Then it turns to the taxing bills with the specific idea in mind that the function of Congress in passing the tax bills is to see to it that the spending bill is not inflationary. Okay, in other words, the taxes are levied in the right way, on the right people, okay, and in the right amounts to ensure price stability in the economy. So now that becomes a change in the procedures, okay, of Congress. Congress people begin to understand that spending is for the public purpose, okay, and taxing is for stopping undesirable consequences of spending that would have undesirable consequences.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the procedures of Congress would change then. Okay, it wouldn't be a pay-go system anymore. Okay, it would be, I think what I said last time was go pay, but I realized it's not really go pay, it's go control inflation. Okay,
Yes, I
would
understand.
be the order of things in Congress. Now, from the standpoint of the kind of economic approach, okay, that I practice, the way federal financing actually works in terms of the sequence of things, it is that Congress spends first and actually taxes later, because this is a point of logic, actually. In other words, if you trace back the history of the United States to the time when the Republic was first established, the first thing the government had to do was to make the currency available to people so that they would be able to pay the taxes when the taxes were actually levied, because people can't pay taxes in the currency of account if the currency of account is not first actually provided to them in some way. Now, the way
It's a chicken and egg issue here.
It's a chicken and egg issue, but the fact is that if you go all the way back to the beginning, the chicken has to be the spending, and the egg,
Yes.
or the egg has to be the spending, the chicken has to be the taxing. Okay, but
Yes.
you get the point of logic. It's very hard, actually, to avoid, because if no currency existed, there'd be no way to pay the taxes.
Right.
Okay? So, because we've gone through the chicken-egg process since then, we somehow arrived at the idea, or Congress did, that taxing has to come first before spending, and they've missed the point of logic. And they did this really because of the gold standard and the fact that we were on the gold standard for so long. And when we went off it in 1971, no one really adjusted the practices to going off the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so now we're left with the situation we have now, where very much of the polity believes that taxes, fund spending, that you have to balance budgets, and they believe that because their own personal experience is that way. Their experience in their family, experience in business, and experience in state politics all reinforce that, because all those entities are not the creators of the currency. They're not the issuers. They're the users of the currency.
Right.
So that's what's created this situation. Okay.
So I gotta wrap it up. I'm getting demands here. So
okay, that's fine and perfectly reasonable. And thank you for giving us all this time. Okay, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This it's a very stimulating discussion. And,
yeah, it's a stimulating one for me too. And the reason why is because of the very detailed knowledge you have of the problems in your district and how they interrelate with each other and come together. And so it increases greatly my understanding of the kinds of federal bills that could help things. Okay, in a lot of districts in the urban areas across the country, which are similar in some ways to San Francisco. Okay, so I very much appreciate it also.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that we will speak again. I would like to do that when
so would I.
All right.
So thank you again, Steve.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, so long. I'll take you out of the broadcast at this point. Okay. Okay, so Steve is gone. Okay, and I'm here to handle questions and comments and real progressives. I suspect that's probably Rocco, who says more than half the military is non-citizens. I don't actually know this, but I can well believe that it's true. Is Stephen blurry and freezing? Yes, Stephen was blurry and freezing. Okay, a good part of the time we had some problems with his sound. Russell says, the good evening. I'm seeing comments, I think, from the beginning. Jeff Ginter says he has more reading to do. I was quite impressed with the way Steve actually approaches problems. That he's a careful thinker. He looks, at all sides. He considers many positions. I think he'll be very good as a legislator. And that he is, I don't know whether he accepts the idea that taxes do not fund spending yet, or whether he completely accepts the idea that it's possible for the government to directly create what it needs to spend when that is the best thing to do from a political point of view. Yes, he does approach things like a lawyer, but after all, he's going to be a legislator. So some of our best people in that area have been lawyers over the years. It's good to note, in this case, that he hasn't been a corporate lawyer. He's been a public service lawyer for his whole career. He's not somebody who got rich on the law. Jeff says he's very intelligent, well thought out, but we need him to better understand how federal finance works. All of his best intentions can go to hell if the finances aren't based in reality. I completely agree, of course, Jeff. I'm going to keep in touch with him. I've kept in touch with a lot of the candidates, who have interviewed here. I send them articles. I send them some messages. I follow up on these broadcasts and keeping in touch with them. Of course, as you know, they come back. This is Steve's second time here. before this is all over, he's going to have a third time here. And I'm going to come back again with the same ideas. I'm going to be sending him, I'll be sending him a link to the student debt study. The job guarantee study will be coming out after April 1st. As soon as it appears, I'm going to send him the report and solicit his comments about the report. I feel sure that the advocacy of a job guarantee program would give him an advantage over Pelosi, and of course would also be very important if he were to commit to that. Now, it sounds to me like the way the CFAR is structured, that he might never commit to CFAR, but I also think that he will be open to victors trying to get him aboard. Okay, I think he's a person of by goodwill, that he is not actually he's not a neoliberal in the sense that he's convinced or confirmed in his view that taxes do fund spending. He doesn't hold that as an ideological principle. So I think that he's not an ideological neoliberal. Until this time, I think he's been, an unintentional one. But I hope I've raised enough doubts in his mind that he really begins to think about it. I'll send him some links, of ours. And as I say, I'll send him the job guarantee report and also the debt elimination report. And I'll send him some other things I've written on the OCF since I saw him last. Okay. And of course, Rocco, I think this is, says, taxes can't fund federal spending. There's nothing to tax until government first spends dollars into existence. You can't start a game of monopoly by collecting rents. Money must be issued first. Simple logic. I think he does understand that. I think he did grasp that point of logic, actually, quite easily. And I think he subscribes to it. But of course, the hole in it right now is that right now the government can tax first before it spends, or would seem to be able to tax first actually before it spends, because the tax money is out there to grab, because much tax money has already been placed in the economy to tax or to borrow. So that allows these people to say, we need to tax or to borrow to pay for things. Now, I try to tell him, I think he still doubts it, but I try to tell him that tax money or bond revenue never hits the Treasury spending account. So as a technical matter, it cannot now fund spending. It has to be the case that the government actually goes ahead and spends first and collects the tax money later and the bond revenue money as well, to remove the money from the economy in order to contain the demand, to make room for the federal spending. So I hope that simple point is now clear to him, but if it's not clear to him, I'll be making it again in my follow-ups and in my next interview with him. Yes, Catherine, I will be sending him something on the student loan report as well. I'll be sending him the link. I won't be sending him something. I'll be sending him the link to the student loan report, as well as the link to the job guarantee report when it comes out, which we're expecting it out in a little over a week now. Okay. So I think that's going to be a pretty great report on the job guarantee. And if Bernie signs on to it at that time, because the report, as I understand it, will be jointly released between the Sanders Institute and the Levy Center, that when Sanders then announces his support of the job guarantee, I think that will have a stampede effect on those candidates who are running as Bernie-crats. And we've met quite a few of them here, quite a few Bernie-crats. And there are some of them that were already for a job guarantee, but there were others who were not getting into the job guarantee business. Even someone like Justin Santopietro, who understands the importance of the job guarantee, didn't think that he could run on it in his district. Hopefully, his mind will be changed when the report hits the street, and if Sanders announces his support for the job guarantee. So I'm very hopeful that will happen at the beginning of next month. And James W. Nicholas says candidates that aren't already familiar with MMT are not going to just hop on board. Follow-up is necessary. It takes work. Reasonable people will eventually get it. Yeah, I certainly agree. In fact, I think that's in part what we're about here. We, in terms of our comments and our posts and our questions for the candidates, we are follow-up, and we are important follow-up. We have to continue our efforts. So how is the tax collected used if it's not paying for government-funded services? The tax collected is used in the sense that it's drained out of the private sector when the Federal Reserve marks down the private accounts, which it does before it creates the new reserves in the Treasury spending account. So the answer is it's not really used. It's just destroyed by the Federal Reserve as part of its banking procedures. I know that's hard to grasp. By Warren Mosler, in his book, The Seven Deadly Innocent about Frauds, but tells about the experience somewhat had of going to the Treasury Department to pay the tax in person, their income tax in person, and to pay it in cash by using bills. And he points out that the person was thanked for his payment and sent on his way, whereby the IRS credited his account as paid and communicated that fact to the Federal Reserve, and then proceeded to destroy, to shred the cash money that had been collected. And it turns out that you can go to the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and you can buy shredded tax money. You can actually buy it as a kind of souvenir. In other words, the tax money collected is never used. It's either shredded, or if it's in the form of reserves, the Federal Reserve simply marks down the private accounts and destroys the reserves in that way. Mark Fabian says maybe Stephen will do his homework before appearing for his next class. I don't know, Mark. People get awfully busy in campaigns. Okay, but I'll go after them. Catherine Tokarska says, I don't have a beef with being a lawyer. I'm one. I don't have a beef with being a lawyer either. Only with certain kind of lawyers. It seems to me Steve's the right kind of lawyer. And Mark Fabian says, Stephen is still a tax to spend Democrat. Well, I'm not so sure that's so strong within him now. He kind of seemed to understand and not to want to argue about whether taxes are used for spending. He happened to seem to accept what I was saying at but face value with respect to that. Okay. So I wouldn't say he is confirmed as a tax to spend Democrat. Our problem is to get him confirmed as a never say the taxes are for spending type of Democrat. We have to get him not to reinforce the frame of the conservatives. James Nicholas says, Joe, thank you. The quality of your broadcast is exceptional. Thank you, James. So is the quality of but the people who come here to attend my broadcast. It's disappointing to see people come on here and not know MMT. Well, more and more people are learning MMT. If you remember, David Hildebrand, who was with me on Thursday night, who was mentioned by Steve, so they're in communication, has learned some MMT, okay, and agrees with it. And what he said certainly indicated that he knew some MMT. So it seems to me Stephen is going to start to learn about MMT too. I think that he's also going to be in touch with Johnny Axum, who is here tonight for part of this anyway. I'm sure Johnny is going to talk to him about it. So, and James again says, Joe is correct, Stephen. Ask Stephanie Kelton, Randy Ray, Warren Mosler, Fidel Kaboub, Bill Mitchell, Stephen Hale, Pavlina Chernyeva, Scott Fulweiler, real economists who tell the truth. Okay, Steve, James, they are real economists, and they do all tell the truth. But it's also true that they don't all agree on every detail of things. And it would be wrong to depict them as agreeing, okay, on every detail. It's especially true when it comes to the politics of things. Mark Fabian says, hey, Jeff, wait till you hear the beginning of this interview. And Jeff says, Joe is right. If you want the job, we expect you to understand this. I know it can be a lot to get your head around, but that is the job. We can't afford to have people getting the job who don't understand the job. Been there, done that. Hate the t-shirt. Yeah, Jeff, I hate the t-shirt too. And Mark says, I suppose you can lead a horse to water, right? Yes, you can, but in the end, we, and I think this is going to fall to me, really do have to persuade him that we are telling him the right things about this. Barbara Wernick says, federal job guarantee, God, I love Joe. He is schooling and exposing this guy. Okay, well, thanks. I wasn't so interested in exposing him, okay, is wrong. I was interested in getting his views on things, what he really thought. And I was interested in about schooling him, okay, or at least expressing the way that I saw things in no uncertain terms, and trying to get him to reconsider his own position. And Zohar points out, yeah, that's why we have a UBI as a supplement to the functional job guarantee. The federal job guarantee. But with time, the JT will provide salaries for jobs that never existed before, like helping in a community garden, for example, learning a skill if one wishes. Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't want to get into that with him because we were starting to run out of time, and I knew he was going to leave, that he wouldn't sit still this time for a 2-hour interview or a 3-hour interview, or my favorite special interviews, things like that. But anyway, I thought if we started going into the details of the job guarantee, it was going to take a lot of time because there's a lot of detail to give, okay, and a lot to say to a person in terms of the what I call the inner life of the job guarantee and why it would be so revolutionary in a helpful way to have it. So Catherine Tokarska says, I got my law degree in 2005, not a drug user, not a mental case, and was homeless for a little over a year because I couldn't get employment. The difference is I slept in my car. Oh my God. Right. One of the reasons why we really need a federal job guarantee. And James says, homelessness is not only a matter of gentrification, it happens to tens of thousands of people who are not already on public assistance or unemployable. Stephen has too narrow a view on homelessness, but yes, gentrification is one dimension of the homelessness problem. I think that when Stephen answered the question on homelessness, he was thinking about his district in San Francisco and his understanding of what goes on in his district. And I think what he was saying was that he encounters a lot of people on the streets. And also, we have to recognize that he's a legal advocate for the homeless. Actually, other things that he does, but one of them is that he's a legal advocate for the homeless. So, from his perspective, in San Francisco, one of the primary reasons for homelessness is gentrification. That is a very, very important problem because he sees it as the problem that's leading people to get thrown out of their apartments that up to that point they were able to afford. Mark Fabian says every city has that same problem. That's disgusting. And Mark Fabian points out Zohar, under a single payer, there is no income requirement. And Russell says that's better without the banner covering Stephen's face. Yes, it was. I sort of noticed that, and then I realized, oh, hey, what am I doing not taking that away? I mean, why am I leaving it there? Why did I put it up in the first place? So I got rid of it. I'm putting up less and less of these comments because they always obscure but the face of either myself or my guest or both of us at the same time. In single payer, under a certain income, you do not pay anything. Well, the payment aspects or taxing aspects of single payer, in my view, okay, are really open questions right now. If we can get Congress voting for spending first and taxing only later, then it may be possible to legislate a single payer bill where there are no premiums, there are no taxes, and where all services are covered for free, and is in HR 676 right now. No copays, no deductibles. Also dental, chiropractic, and mental health services completely covered. Coco, we just need the second Bill of Rights, the Economic Bill of Rights. You got it, Johnny. And he says, I actually have to update my CFA contract to include federal job guarantee and up the minimum to $20 an hour. Ask for 20, settle for 15, or you ask for 15 and get 12. Yeah, I completely agree. And a couple of other new things. Laugh out, really just more fire for my feet. Also more fire for your heart, Johnny. Housing is the most important factor. Safety net, federal job guarantee, a single payer. And Mark Fabian says, there are more homeless who do not have mental issues. Singling out the mentally ill, it seems to me to be a very right-wing response. Yes, it may be, but okay, very often what congressmen do, what people who run for Congress do is, like the rest of us, they talk from their own experience. He was talking from his experience in his district with a lot, okay, of homeless people. And he seems to encounter, okay, among them, a lot of issues that are mental in character. which he then wants to do something about. I mean, he wants to do something about that. He is he's very strong on protecting the rights of mentally ill people. And very strong on the idea of decriminalizing mental illness. So I don't think he really comes at this from a right-wing point of view, but one thing he may not be taking into account is the power of change in a person's economic conditions to have an influence on the mental illness of that person. In other words, if the mentally ill, some of them anyway, can be addressed through a federal job guarantee program in a way that takes account of their mental illness when they begin the program, that might be a way of impacting their mental illness in a way that largely gets rid of its consequences on a day-to-day basis. So I think Steve is very much attuned to the intersectionality of a lot of his issues, but he may not be attuned to the intersectionality where full employment is involved, full employment at a living wage with good fringe benefits, and how important such a program can be for all kinds of related problems. But okay, I'm really glad that we have candidates like him who are thinking in terms of the intersectionality among the various issues. Now, I would like him to be a little less impressed by the complexity of the problems and a little more willing to tackle more progressive solutions that may solve a great part of them. Coco says, well, then don't run, Stephen. You clearly are stating you will not comply with your political promises. Well, okay, I'm not so sure, Coco. Okay, first I want to state, I want my candidates to be very clear about what, at the time of their running, they are very committed to. And I expect them to largely fulfill all their commitments. But we are not perfect, okay, and I am not perfect, okay, and we and the candidates themselves cannot foresee the circumstances they're going to encounter in office. And those circumstances can mean that they have to do the difficult thing for a representative of going against one or two of the things that they've committed to. I would say a very small number of the things that they've committed to in order to better serve the public purpose. Okay, but I think that there are no guarantees for the candidate here. And there are no guarantees for the voters also. I think the candidates should sign agreements like the CFAR agreements, should put their promises in verbal form so people can better judge what they fulfilled their political promises or not. So I hope that he signs the CFAR contract, okay, and that Victor is successful in convincing him to sign it. And I think Victor has to be able to say that if he doesn't sign it, and regretfully, we're going to have a problem formally supporting him. Okay, I think Victor should say that because that's the only way to get this process going and to really hold the candidates accountable. And then if Steve still doesn't want to sign the contract, I think he's going to have to understand what our position is, and he's going to have to take his chances. I guess that's the only thing I can say about it. Allison Drucker points out, I don't believe it's a legally binding contract, Stephen. I don't believe so either. It's not a legally binding contract, but okay, I think it's a morally binding contract. We intend it to be a morally binding contract in the sense that if you go against it and you do something else directly opposed to the sense of the items you committed to in the contract, then clearly you're breaking trust with your voters and you deserve to be defeated in the next election. That's how they're held accountable. And James points out, okay, a good point, I think, that commitment to an agenda does not put you on the hook for it coming about, but it does put you on the hook to fight for that agenda with everything you have. And Mark says, this is why most hate attorneys. And Barbara says, yes, Mark, we need to hear your truth. If you dance, I imagine Barbara meant to say, if you dance, we dance. And Mark Fabian said, isn't that the point of running on a platform, to let the voters know for what you stand? And Steve does seem to be running on a platform. I mean, it's on his website. You can tell what he's for when you read his prose on it. Okay, so he does seem to be saying where he stands. What he's also saying is that he cannot give any guarantees that he will stand there 3 months from the time he's elected, or 6 months from the time he's elected, or more than a year. I don't know if that's enough for me. In other words, I'd feel better if he could voice now what his doubts are with respect to the CFAR items. Okay? In other words, which of the items on CFAR he thinks might be subject in some way to changing conditions. I think he should at least be able to say that. But I think he should be able to sign the CFAR. As I read the CFAR, it's not really terribly radical. I mean, if I had my druthers, I'd like to sign candidates to a more radical contract than the current CFAR contract. So we have to see if the CFAR contract is going to change. Catherine Tokarska, 1.5 T growing at 3,000 a second. We need to end this insanity. Well, it wouldn't be insanity if they spent the 1.5 T on, but I don't think they need to spend this. In Fidel's live stream today, he estimated that to fully employ the nearly 24 million people that he thinks we would be employing under a job guarantee. He calculated the cost of that at roughly $600 billion a year. I've been giving you figures that are somewhat similar in terms of, my estimates. I think that I put mine at $650 billion a year, and I said that if you added in the basic income, things might go as high as $1 trillion. Okay, and also the basic income is not a universal basic income; it's just for the people we've talked about, the disabled people, and people who, for one reason or another, I just believe they cannot stand to work. Just eliminate all student debt and rebrand it as a free college pony. And Catherine Tokarska says, student loans are a scam. It's not forgiveness. I'm sorry, cancellation. There's nothing to forgive. They didn't do anything wrong. You bet they didn't do anything wrong. Actually, Catherine, it's a very good point. The language of forgiveness is itself the language of the oppressor here. I think the banks and the government have been the oppressors in this situation. I think they ought to cancel the debts now and pay reparations to people who have paid them in the past. That's what I was really proposing. There are reparations that are due people who spent 20 to 30 years repaying student debts because of the unconscionable interest rates and the penalties when they were forced to interrupt payments because they lost jobs or things like that. I mean, the government and the banks hit the people in unforgivable ways. This simply victimized people all over the country for the sake of the banks. And most recently, since the government owns 80% of the debt, for the sake of a government that doesn't even need the money. It didn't even need the money. It was blood-sucking from these former students. Allison Drucker, retroactive. You bet, retroactive. Nothing short of full forgiveness makes any sense. Doesn't make any sense to me, Catherine. Those constant share it to team thingies make your writing mess up. I know. They make, they make mine mess up all the time. Yes, Stephen, that is the propaganda that keeps us accepting austerity, says Mark Fabian. If I can get MMT and understand its implications, anyone can. That's true, Mark, and certainly Steve Jaffe can. The problem is he needs to put in just a little time on it. It doesn't really take that much time. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to read Warren Moster's book and follow it up with Stephanie Kelton's key article on taxes and bonds not funding federal spending, and maybe Randy Ray's introductory books, and you've got enough of it for the time being. If some congressional candidate will sit down for an afternoon or for a day and read the stuff and understand it, it's just not that hard for somebody who's a lawyer, and probably a good one, and who reads carefully and gets implications carefully, and who is analytical. Should be child's play to pick up the basics, okay, of MMT. Kathy Bassett says, I got it when someone said it's an accounting operation. Deficit on the federal side equals surplus in the non-government center. Easy peasy. You got it. Mark says, I am not nearly as knowledgeable as Dr. J. I doubt if many are. I was an activist in the 60s. So was I, Mark. So was I. But I am just an old something. I can't see that on my screen. It's wiped off for some reason. I can't understand it. Maybe saying, I am just an old, maybe rock. Phys ed, environmental education, not poli-sci, okay, or economics. Well, environmental education was pretty challenging, wasn't it? I mean, maybe phys ed was pretty challenging too, but maybe not in the same way. And James says, household, states, and businesses are currency users. They must acquire the currency before they spend. The federal government is the currency issuer. It creates the currency, yes. And Kathy says, oops, I spoke so soon. He wants to learn. Mark says, I appreciate the kudos, gang, but I am just a grunt who is looking forward to the past 3 decades that only MMT was able to answer. Well, Mark, you are one of our most valuable players. You really are. Carmen says, Mark Fabian, I can see you being a senator. You're super knowledgeable, on the same level as Dr. J, at least. Well, thank you, Carmen. I appreciate seeing candidates reject the notion that PAYGO only applies to progressive policies and ideas. So many great things to watch on Facebook today, trying to catch up. Mr. Jaffe should check out Dr. Kaboob's excellent presentation from earlier. I will send him the link. I saw Fidel today, and he was great. He did a great presentation, which he usually does. But I thought today's went particularly well. It was particularly clear. It handled many of the critical issues that arise with the job guarantee, and gave people a good understanding of the kinds of things to expect from a job guarantee. It was a great presentation. And James compliments me on my knowledge. Well, thank you, James. Once again, Johnny Axum, I thought he had it when he quoted that taxes destroy. So close. Yeah, so close. John Marshall. The power to tax is the power to destroy. Amazing that John Marshall understood that, right? The old Federalist, the aristocrat, the guy who was trying to create judicial supremacy over the Congress. He understood that taxes destroy money. It just needs a little education on MMT. Federal taxes do not fund spending. Philip Fisher says, Citizens United needs to end with corporations. Yes, that's very, very true. In the last interview with Steve, if you reference the last interview with Steve, which was, I believe, on March 8th or something like that, we talked about that. I introduced him to the exception clause, Article 3, Section 2. And he seemed to be very amenable to that. I have no doubt he's probably asked somebody about it or looked at it since that time and realized that the Supreme Court can be kept out of campaign financing disputes. So, how would those taxes from the wealthy be used to pay for your other planks? Admiral Akbar says it's a trap. It is. And John asks, now Joe's going to get him. So why is a progressive tax rate more equitable? Well, if you enforce it and don't have any loopholes, so then it leads, of course, to reducing wealth inequality. And wealth inequality is a dangerous thing for a democracy. Because the more unequal the distribution of wealth is, the more money the rich have to overturn our political system, which is precisely what's been going on for the last 40 years or so. Actually, the first break in the very high progressive income tax was during the Kennedy-Johnson years, when the rate was reduced from 90% to 70%. I've always wondered whether John Kennedy did not have some secret notion that he'd be doing a favor for his father if he lowered taxes, in that instance. But anyway, he did it because he was assured that it was a Keynesian tax cut that would somehow lead to more spending and more consuming, and that it would therefore be beneficial to the economy. The evidence at the time was that was the way that it actually worked out. I don't know if that was ever really proven, but that's what people thought at the time. And this fed the myths behind Ronald Reagan's tax cuts in the early 1980s. Mindy says $60 an hour. I'm not sure for what, but and Joy Marie Mann says mental health does not get talked about by candidates nearly enough. Yes, Joy, you're very right. Johnny says, I got you for a co-sponsor for that bill. Johnny's looking for co-sponsors, looking for people that he can run with. Okay, everybody. I think it's my time to go. I've been here for 2.5 hours now. I haven't looked up recently to see how many people are still hanging in there. I don't actually know at this point. There may not be anybody listening to me any longer. Well, I'm down to 14 viewers. So to you 14 who have hung in there, thank you very much. I'm going to say good night to you now until Tuesday night when Tuesday night, when do I have this scheduled for? Let's see. I think it's, well, okay. Anyway, Johnny Axum is coming back for a second interview on Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on that night. And we'll probably be going then for about an hour and 15 minutes because at 9:30 there will be the CFAR live stream, okay, at that time. And so I always like to end about at least 15 minutes before that, so people have a chance for a little break before they sign into the CFAR live stream. I think that Johnny Axum is going to have a busy time on Tuesday night because my understanding is that he's also scheduled to appear on the CFAR live stream as well as on my live stream from 8 to 9:15. So everybody, once again, good night, and I'll see you Tuesday. Okay. Also, before I go, I keep forgetting to do this. It's very important. Okay, Real Progressives has a Patreon account. Okay. I'd like to remind you, as I do in every session, that we'd very much like you to go to the Patreon account if you'd like our broadcasts. Okay, make a contribution if you're able to afford it. And I have a Patreon account as well. And I'd very much appreciate the same thing. Okay. If you happen to be feeling generous, then I could certainly use some help too to continue with these broadcasts. So thanks again very much for coming. And once again, I'll see you Tuesday night.